results of mass hysteria.
I only... You may wish to adjust the dial. You are currently tuned into the wrong station. Hey, come on in. Let me just move some of these books off the chair. My daughter, Kiara, first-year psych at university. Parties more than her mother and I would like, but she's doing okay. What can you do? Want some coffee? No? Well, just grab a seat then. So I guess you wanted to hear that story, huh? No, I said I'd tell it, and I'll tell it. I'm just not going to enjoy it. Okay. Well, I guess I'll start by saying, I never knew much about my dad's side of the family, until he died. My mom's? Lots. Too much, if I'm honest. They're Catholic, so there's about 100 of them, and they all live in D.C., about an hour's drive away from each other. Spent most of my summers out there as a kid, and got enough drama and politics to last me a lifetime. But my dad's side, well, I've got one aunt and one cousin, but my dad and my aunt never really talked. See, my grandfather was a drunk, and he died young, and everyone in the family blamed everyone else in the family, probably. I'm speculating here, because they all actually blame themselves. Well, you probably know the kind of guy that my dad was like. Not exactly the type to talk about his past or his feelings or anything like that. And so beyond the stuff I just said, which I mostly gathered from things my mom told me, I didn't really know much about him until he died. I don't think I really got to know him until I went through his stuff, after the fact. Yeah, people tell me that's often the way of things. Anyway, after he dies, Mom gets in touch with me and says she's gonna go stay at his house for a couple of days and sort through some stuff. And since we haven't seen much of each other since Jessica and I moved out of the city, she asks if we all want to come and stay as well. Maybe make it sort of a family thing. So I say sure. No. They hadn't lived together for years. She was still in his will and everything, and in their own way I think they still loved each other a lot. But she'd have to be a lunatic to stay with him, and he'd have had to been a lunatic to let anyone else stay with him. You can ask the question. I said I'd tell you the story, and I'll tell you the story. No, he never hit us. I think he was always afraid, though, that was the person he could become. If you talked to anybody he knew, you'd hear that he had a temper. But it went further than that. My dad had real anger issues. Scary ones. Don't think I ever met anybody that angry in my whole entire life. And that includes a couple of my ex-girlfriends. Growing up, we'd always have these polka dots on the walls, where he'd put his fist through them and then patch them up later. He never laid a hand on either of us, though. At least, he never laid a hand on me, and I think he never laid a hand on my mother. I never saw or heard anything about it, and she said he never did, anyway. But I guess you can never really tell in a situation like that. But there was always the possibility. It was like he never hit us, and he never threatened to hit us, but it was like all three of us were living every day with the fear that he might completely lose control and send one of us to the hospital. It must have been terrifying for him. Christ knows that it was for us. Oh, I didn't become consciously aware of this until a couple years ago. Jess made me start seeing a shrink, and it made a huge difference in my life. A lot of guys wouldn't talk about that, but fuck it, that's how it is. Unconsciously, though, I think I always knew. When I was really young, like in kindergarten, it was still cool to spank your kids, you know? I mean, some parents still do it now, but that's controversial, right? But when I was growing up, it was just what you did, right? Some people were starting to say, hey, you can really fuck up your kid that way. But as you can probably guess, my dad wasn't one of them. 100%, that was a guy who believed in corporal punishment. One time he told me criminals should be caned, like in Singapore or whatever. But in spite of that, he never spanked me, not even once. It was like he knew that if he crossed that line once, just one time, then that was it. And there would be no going back, and we'd all become one of those horror stories you see about on the news. So after I got a job and moved out at 17, it wasn't much time before Mom called it quits too and got her own place. I think he was relieved by that. So I guess it wasn't really a happy homecoming to go back there, even with the old man dead. It was a family home, though. My grandparents' place originally. And in its own way, it was sort of like a vacation for Jess and Kiera and I. Coming to the big city for a couple days is nice when you live out in the burbs. So we take an afternoon to get settled in. Jess and I take the master bedroom. Kiera is about 7 at this time. And so she goes on the pull-out couch in the office, which had been my bedroom growing up, and my dad's when he grew up. We order Chinese, and we try and watch a movie on TV, but the TV's about 100 years old, and there's no cable or anything, so it's basically just CBC or the news in Spanish. My mom's not staying with us, by the way. She only lives about 20 minutes away by transit, so she's just still staying at her place. Anyway, Jess says she's gonna take Kiera to the museum the next day, so Mom and I can start looking through the old man's stuff on our own. She thinks she's being clever, but I get it. Sometimes Jess can only take small doses of Mom. We don't sleep well that night, though. Kiera has a nightmare around 1, and it takes an hour before we can get her back to bed. As a result, I'm pretty crabby when Mom starts leaning on the doorknob at 8 a.m. the next day. But that's life with kids. I make bacon and put on some coffee while Mom gets started with the boxes. Jess sneaks Kiera out the back door before Mom can ask the two of them for help for just a few minutes. And then it's just Mom and I getting to work. And it's actually a lot of fun in its own way. You know, we're down in the basement putting things in new boxes, unpacking old boxes and sorting things into piles of keep and throw away and whatever. Taking stuff out to the curb, and I sort of realized that, hey, it's been a couple of years since I've had some one-on-one time with just my mom. So it's nice. And at some point during the day, we start talking about Dad, and about his life, and about who he was to her, and about what he was like when he was young, and stuff like that. And I start to realize how little I knew the guy. Like, for me, he was just this tyrant when I was growing up, and this crusty old bastard when I was an adult. But talking to my mom, I start to see this whole other side of him, and how when she was young, and she had just moved to the city from Tumbleweed, British Columbia, he was this dashing, mysterious figure to her. She showed me some old pictures of him from when they first started going out, and they were, 21 or something like that. Stupid kids. Anyway, she shows me this picture of him at that age, and he looks like a young Brando. Like, Jesus, why wasn't I ever that handsome? And then, somewhere along the way, we start talking about his anger, and why he was such a mean son of a bitch all the time. And that's when she starts to tell me a bit more about his dad's drinking. He wasn't a mean drunk. Nothing like my dad, for sure. If he had been like my dad, and he drank, I don't think my dad would have made it past the age of 8. He'd have killed him. Granddad, apparently, was more of a sad, pathetic kind of drunk. He'd just disappear for a few days at a time. Never had a job, drank away all of his and his mother's money. Probably cheated, though I never thought to ask my grandmother. She's not the sort who'd give you a straight answer anyway. She's all about keeping up appearances. If you ask her, Granddad just liked a little nip now and again. Well, a little nip now and again doesn't make you drop dead from cirrhosis of the liver at age 55. But because of this, Dad had to be the man of the house from the time he was 10, and had to have a job from the age of 15. Never finished high school. That's something I never knew about him. Probably a big relief for his teachers. But that amount of responsibility, that young, is a lot of strain, and that strain's gotta find an outlet. But Dad had to be better than his dad, you see. That was part of being the man his mom expected him to be. And so instead of drinking or screwing around, he just took all that strain, and he bunched it up inside of him, and he carried it like a lit stick of dynamite in his chest for the whole rest of his life. Can you guess what killed him? Bingo. Huge coronary. Doctors say they never saw anything like it. Anyway, so I start talking about all this stuff, about how so much of my shit comes from my dad, and so much of his shit came from his dad, and it makes me wonder, okay, so where did his shit come from? And I put this question to my mom, almost exactly like that. And that's when the conversation stopped cold. Well, I don't know if this is how it really happened, or if it's just me making things up after the fact, revising memories in light of everything that happened later. But the way I remember it now, this shadow passed over her face, like the sun going behind a cloud, and her shoulders drooped a little bit, and she just said, "I don't know, honey." And then she said she was tired and we should take a break for lunch. I didn't think too much about it. You know, fair enough, it's been a long morning and she's getting older. Why wouldn't she be tired? Maybe it struck me as a little odd, but again, I'm not sure if that's just me making things up after the fact. Anyway, so as we're going up the stairs for lunch, I notice that she's picked up this big heavy cardboard box, and I ask what she's doing with it. She tells me it's just a box of stuff we've already looked through and she's gonna take it out to the curb. I don't really recognize the box, but she says she's sure, and that it's just a bunch of Dad's old technical manuals. Only, I remembered the box with the manuals, and that wasn't it. And then I take a closer look at the box, and I see it's old. Really old. Coming apart at the corners, held together by masking tape that's dried to the point of crumbling, and covered with this crusty layer of gray dust on top. Now I start to think that maybe something's up, because if we had looked through that box, the dust on top wouldn't have been disturbed. And also, my mom is 100% not the sort of person who would lose track of which boxes we had and hadn't looked through. She is methodical when it comes to this stuff, which is maybe one of the reasons Jess can only deal with her in small doses. So I say to her that she shouldn't be carrying something this heavy up the stairs. She tries to tell me it's fine, but I really insist. Well, she sort of half-heartedly thanks me as I take the box. I leave it in the hallway at the top of the stairs, right by the office, and I think this is the end of it. After that, we have lunch and we do a few more hours of work in the afternoon. I try and bring the conversation back to my grandfather and my great-grandfather a couple of times, but every time I do, she just doubles down on talking about the politics at the church. So eventually I drop it. Jess and Kiera get home at about 3, and I go and pay half attention to some World War II documentary on TV, while Mom hangs out with them, and after dinner, Mom heads home. Now at this point, Jess is just in the early stages of being pregnant with Harris. So later in the evening, she gets this craving for pickles, and I walk around to the corner store to go get them. But when I walk back up the street, I notice something in the driveway. It's the box. It's tucked in with all the other ones that got put out. And I know Jess didn't put it out. She's not going to touch something with that much dust on it. So I know it was Mom. And at this point, I don't even care what's inside the box. I'm just irritated about being treated like I'm stupid. So I pick up the box and I bring it right back inside, and I put it back down outside the office where it was before. I know, it sounds petty, but you've got to hold firm on the little things sometimes. Well, it's another rough night after that. Dad's mattress is well past its shelf life, and Kiera has nightmares again. And this time they're so bad she insists on sleeping with us the rest of the night. So once again, I'm not in the best place when Mom starts rapping on the windows at 8 a.m. Jessica's pissed too, because this is supposed to be a vacation for us, so we should be able to sleep in a bit. But Kiara's already up and bouncing anyway, so if we hadn't been woken up by one generation, it would have been the other. I make breakfast and coffee again, and Mom asks if Jess and Kiara are going to stay and help today, but Jess says they just have to go to the aquarium, and manages to get Kiara out the door before the poor kid can even say she doesn't like fish. Now at this point, with the rough sleep and the hectic morning, I've completely forgotten about the box. And just before we go downstairs, Mom heads up to the washroom. When she gets out, I'm waiting at the top of the stairs, and I just see her stop dead like she's been slapped in the face. I ask her what's wrong, and she says, "Why on earth did you put this picture up?" Now, I've disappointed Mom plenty of times in my life, but she's never looked at me with this kind of disgust she's looking at me right now. I ask her what she's talking about, and I go over to see what she's looking at. On the wall, outside the bathroom door, there's some old family pictures. Aunts and great-aunts and uncles and shit, some of them fairly new, most of them pretty old. I don't know 3/4 of the people in them, that sort of thing. And she's pointing at one of them, and I can see that she's worked up, eyes wide, nostrils flared, and everything. I hadn't seen her that angry since I was a kid, and she's just pointing at this old beige picture of this guy. What do you call that when the picture's all... Yeah, sepia. This old sepia photograph of a guy in a dark jacket, sort of a military-looking coat. So I ask her what the issue is here, and she asks me again, "Why did you put this picture back up?" I don't know what she's talking about. I didn't put any picture up. That picture's been there for years. And she tells me that picture was not there yesterday. Well, nobody put the picture up, so unless some burglar broke into the house and started spangling the place with family heirlooms, then the picture was already there. I tell her that, and when I touch the picture and swing it slightly out of place on the hook, sure enough, there's a patch of darker paint on the wall, like the picture's been protecting it from the sun for a couple of decades. I start to think that maybe Dad's death is hitting Mom a little harder than she's willing to admit, and I ask her who that's a picture of anyway. She pays no attention to my question. She just says, "Sorry, you were right, let's just get back to work." The whole thing seemed to have left her pretty rattled, so I drop it too. For the next little while, everything's fine. The first 15 or 20 minutes are kind of awkward, and we're working in silence. But then we get into the groove of things again, and we start to chat and shoot the shit. And she starts telling me about how she ran into one of my ex-girlfriends who was a real... well, and how this person doesn't seem to be doing so great, and everything's comfortable between Mom and me again. Over the next couple of hours, the work pace starts to slow. You know how it is. You open a box to see if it's junk, and then something catches your eye, and the next thing you know, you've been reading report cards from the 1950s for 45 minutes. Well, late morning, I'm stuck in one of these loops, and I'm reading my granddad's old immigration papers. Born in England, came over as a kid during the war. But something in the papers sort of strikes me as odd. Once it hits me, though, it stands out as really odd. "Hey, didn't Granddad come over during the war?" I ask. "During the Blitz, yes," my mom answers. I look at the document again and sort of blink, making sure I haven't misread it. The immigration papers say that he came over in 1945. She asks, "So what?" And I tell her the Blitz had been over for a pretty long time by 1945. And I'm pretty sure I knew that in the back of my head, but it was on my mind because of that World War II documentary that had been on my dad's shitty basic TV package. It had been about the Blitz. And when I tell her this, she says it does seem a little strange, and she shuts right up again. After how weird she's been acting, I don't want to push it. Clearly something's going on with her, and she's done talking about family history. So for the rest of the morning, we just talk about, I don't know, some celebrity scandal or something. And then we go upstairs and have some leftovers for lunch. I offer to do the dishes, and when I'm done, I wander into the living room and find her staring at a picture hanging in the corner. It's an old black and white family portrait. Mother, father, older daughter, younger son. And because I'm an idiot who can't help himself, I open my mouth and ask if that one was there yesterday too. And then she looks at me, and for just a moment, I see this deep, dark terror in her eyes. And I get really afraid because I start to think that maybe she's really losing it. But then she rolls her eyes and slaps me on the arm. Real funny, she says, and she brushes past me and goes upstairs to use the washroom. She goes all the way upstairs, even with her bad joints, even though the other washroom is just down the hall, the one with the other picture hanging in front of it. Well, I take this new one off the wall, and of course there's a patch of darker paint behind it, like it's been there for years. And I look more closely at the picture, and I notice that the father is the same man in the picture outside the bathroom, about a couple of years older and with a beard. He has the same cheekbones, the same square jaw. Handsome man, and even though the picture's black and white, you can see how clear and pale his eyes are. I flip the photograph over in my hands, and there are names written on the back. William, Elizabeth, Mary, Clifford. Real waspy names. But the important thing is, I recognize Clifford. It was my grandfather's name. This was a portrait of his family. Him, my great-aunt, my great-grandmother, and William, the man with the pale eyes. My great-grandfather. I hear the toilet flush upstairs, and I hang the picture back on the wall. Mom and I head back to the basement and get back to work. We're still talking about the celebrity scandal. It's a juicy one. And at some point the leftovers are getting to me. Not to get into too much detail, but we've been eating Indian food. And after I finish up in the washroom, I'm about to head back downstairs when I notice that box again, sitting in the hall outside the office. So instead of heading back downstairs, I sit myself down beside it, and I open it up. It's mostly just old papers, disordered pages of letters written in a cursive that I can't really make out. So I shift them aside and I pull out this sort of leather-bound scrapbook. And the first page is this folded-up piece of paper that says George V in big letters at the top, as in George V. It's a commission, granting the rank of midshipman in His Majesty's Navy to one William Onslow, gentleman. He would have been crazy young at the time, but back then you could be a midshipman on an active warship at 12 or 13. They didn't raise the minimum age to 16 until like 1950. I'd never known he was in the Navy. Never knew anything about him. Now I was starting to think that maybe this was something that had been kept from me as some sort of pacifist thing, you know? My mom's a bit of a hippie, she's from that generation, and I'm getting pretty mad at her thinking about it. But then I start flipping through this book, and I forget about it because I get sucked into the pages. There are just all these pictures in there, sepia photos from 1900-something. pictures of life on board ship, pictures of various ports of call. Cool stuff, you know? There's this one picture, though, that stood out. It was, I don't know, it must have been Southeast Asia or something. There are palm trees in the background, and they're standing on a beach. There's this kid in the picture, and I think it must have been my great-grandfather, because he has those pale eyes, and because, in this weird way, he sort of looks how I looked at that age. And there's a man with him, standing real close behind him, with both hands on his shoulders. And around them, and this takes me a minute to figure out what they are, because it's a black and white picture, so they just sort of look not how you imagine, but around them, 4 or 5 of them on either side, are these 5-foot wooden stakes, and each one of them has a human head spitted onto it. Yeah, to this day I have no idea. There's some writing on the back, too smudged to make out, and this is the picture I'm holding in my hands when my mother comes up the stairs. And when she sees me holding the picture, there's just this moment where it looks like she's gonna break into little pieces. But she's a strong woman. You'd have to be to live with my dad for as long as she did. And so she just steps up to me, and as calm as anything, she takes the picture out of my hands, and she puts it back in the book, puts the book back in the box, and closes the box. She asks me to take it out to the curb, and I do. But when I get out to the curb, I put the box down and I stare at it for a moment. And then I open it up again. I take the picture, tuck it into my pocket, and close the box and walk away. No, I don't know why. Morbid curiosity? A desire to preserve some of the family history? He was my great-grandfather. He was part of me. I don't know. Well, after that, I go back into the house, and Mom's sitting at the kitchen table. She's put on a pot of tea, and she asks me to sit down. When it's ready, she gives me a cup, lots of milk and sugar, then she hands me an old, yellowed envelope. I ask her what it is, but she just tells me it's for me to read. And I open it. It contains a stained and crumbling letter, written in neat cursive and dated November 1944. It starts out with, "Dear Colleen." My mom tells me she's a distant relative of ours, or she was. She and her family put my grandfather up when he came over. I ask her what that has to do with anything. She looks at me, and it's the look I remember her giving me when I scraped my knees as a child, or when I got my heart broken as a teenager. Just read the letter, she tells me, if you want to. I look down at the page. Dear Colleen, I hope this letter finds you well. Have just received word that William has been discharged and will be returning to us after all. And so, I have to ask something of you that is beyond all reasonable expectations. Will you take Clifford in? He is now the same age as his sister was. I cannot go through it again, Colleen. Please, I cannot go through it again. In desperation, Elizabeth. In desperation. Well, after that, I stood up and without saying anything, I went into the living room and took down the picture that was hanging there, leaving the dark rectangle in the paint. Then I went over to the washroom hallway and got that picture as well. I brought them both out to the curb, and I smashed them and threw them in with the rest of the garbage. I didn't throw the photograph out with them, though. I went back to the house, and I found one of the boxes piled up outside the office, and I slid the picture into one of the photo albums inside of it. And then, my mother and I went into the basement and worked some more, both just trying to forget everything by burying it in hard work. When Jess and Kiara came back in the evening, we ate leftovers, and when Mom left, Jess, and this is one of the reasons I love her, immediately knew something was up. And so after we put Kiara to bed, I told her everything. And then we poured ourselves a drink. And that night... No, I said I'd tell you the story. No, I don't need to take a break. All right. That night, I had strange dreams. I still remember parts of them. I dreamed I was in the living room, and I was looking at the family portrait. But I knew something was wrong because part of me knew that I had smashed the picture and thrown it out. But now I was looking at it. It had become slightly different, though, because in this picture, Elizabeth was now sitting off to the side, with her hands over her mouth, and William was standing behind Clifford and Mary, and he had both of his hands pressing down on Mary's shoulders, and somehow, he also had both of his hands pressing down on Clifford's shoulders, and he was smiling. And then I noticed that the background of the picture wasn't some drawing room in England. It was that beach in Southeast Asia, and there were a pair of hands pushing down on William's shoulders as well. the sailor who had stood behind him in the photo. And there were a pair of hands pushing down on the sailor's shoulders as well. And all around them, hundreds and hundreds of stakes, all of them decorated with a spitted, gushing head. And that was when I woke to hear my daughter screaming. I got to my feet. It was still like being in a dream. You want to run and go, but everything still seems hazy and insubstantial, and you're dizzy and your whole body feels weak. I tripped over something in the hall, the box with the photo album, and as it tipped over, the photo of the beach slipped out and slid across the floor, gleaming in the darkness. Kiara was screaming at an even higher pitch, and when I burst into the room, I could see something crouched over her in the darkness, and I shouted at it, but it came out weak and half-strangled with fear, and the something in the darkness looked up at me, and all I could see was a pair of pale blue eyes. And then Jessica turned on the light, and there was nothing in the room but the two of us and our crying daughter. Jess doesn't, Well, one time, some old university friends of hers came over and each of them drank a bottle of wine to themselves. She told me she'd seen something after that, but she denies it now. Well, I picked up my daughter, and I grabbed my wife by the hand and I took them down to the car. We had some cough medicine in the glove compartment, and I gave Kiara more than I probably should have as a responsible parent. And then I drove us an hour and 10 minutes back to our house. That night, neither Jess or I said anything. That night, she believed it. Kiara? I don't think so. I hope she doesn't. No, I never talked to her about it. Because I want it to end. I want it to end with her. I want to be the last one to know his name. The next morning, I called my mom and drove back to the city to meet her at her place. I told her not to go into the house until I got there. All she said to me when I got there was, "You saw him, didn't you?" And I told her, yes. Yes, I did. Yeah, we did go back. And when we got there, the front door was open. I'd slammed it behind me the night before, when we went outside. The pictures were hanging just where they'd been, in the living room and in the hallway. The glass on both frames was intact. The pull-out couch in the office was immaculate, where we'd left it in a tangle of sheets. Somebody had made the bed, with military precision. The box of his things was sitting in the middle of the bed, and the picture, with the heads, was sitting right on top of it. We took the box, and the photograph and the pictures back out into the driveway, and then we doused them with lighter fluid and lit them on fire. Then, we sold the house for half of its worth to a development company, who tore it down and built a big, ugly McMansion. Is that it? I hope so. But sometimes, I look at Kiara, and I think about the kind of father that I've been, and I don't know. I hope that's it. I really hope that's it. The Wrong Station is created and produced by Alexander Saxton and Anthony Botello, featuring Anthony Botello. With music composed by Alon Zitrin and original artwork by Jenny Henderson. This week's episode, Family Photos, was written by Alexander Saxton. Tune in every Thursday for full-length episodes. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and iTunes, and contact us at thewrongstation@gmail.com. Until next week, thank you for listening.
Ad Lucem is a socio-political thriller about a revolutionary tech company and their shaking innovation, Kara.
Welcome to Ad Lucem OI.
Starring Chris Pine, Olivia Wilde, and Troyan Bellisario, Ad Lucem will have listeners questioning, in the age of technology, will your humanity survive? All 9 episodes are out now for an immersive, binge-worthy thrill. Search for Ad Lucem wherever you're listening now.
Please be advised. This episode contains explicit language, scenes of sexual assault, violence, and other dangerous situations. Not advised for children under the age of 17.
Morning, princess.
It's 5 p.m.
Yeah, but you've been sleeping all day. God damn, you look like shit, man.
If you're gonna be mean, at least be funny. Fuck, it's snowing.
It started last night. You been high that long?
You think the roads will be plowed?
This is Chicago, man.
I don't know what that means.
It means leave early.
Fuck, I'm already running late. I need your piss.
No, you've been passed out since a needle hit your arm yesterday.
Yeah, that's why I fucking need it.
No, that sucks because I don't have to pee.
Are you really picking today to do this?
Now, how was today different than any other day?
Fuck. Whatever.
What is that?
What?
The envelope you're holding.
Nothing. Just some references. Leah's gonna help me get a job.
So if Tara shows up again today, I can send her away for good?
No. Maybe I won't work for Burnout, but I need the dope.
You know you're out on conditional release, right?
I know.
Did you know you're really fucking up your reentry to society?
Yeah, I know.
No, you're gonna end up back in prison, Sam. Back in prison or dead.
I know.
Q-Code presents Baraska, created by Rebecca Klingel, starring and produced by Cole Sprouse.
You may wish to adjust the dial. You are currently tuned into the wrong station. Yep, still snowing out there. Looks like you'll be spending the night here. Even if I let you go, and there's not much chance I'll let you go out there and freeze to death. I doubt you'd get your car a mile down the road. It's cold out there. Damn cold. Still, I've seen worse. Come on, take a seat. Throw your feet up, no need to be polite like. Now, like I was saying, this cold is nothing. We're down here in the city. Running water, electricity, indoor heat. Hell, even without all that, you still got 4 walls and a ceiling. No chance of the wind blowing your fire out in here. Drink? Ah, there you go. Just let me know when you need a top off. Now see, I worked up north damn near most of my adult life now. I was a sawyer, sawmill man. Not much reason, that's just the work there was when I was a young guy. Pa did fish out west, but he comes to settle out here at the end of his life, near Ma's family. So there I am, young guy, no connections in the business. Had to work all kinds of jobs up in nowhere and no place. Let me tell you about one place. The last place I ever worked, in fact. Shame, too. First good job I had and all. Spent all those years being a runaround average Joe millman, and this was the first time running the mill myself. Out in the middle of nowhere, of course, being my first job as the boss. Far up north on the Peace River. then about 50 kilometers north of that, a good while west of Lake Margaret. Like I said, I worked lots of jobs. Plenty further north than that, and plenty in colder places. But none were ever as nasty as that place. Something about the cold there was different. Got in your bones like nothing else. Felt like you were like to die each night. Thank goodness I was never up there too long in the colder months. No man should be cutting wood in the dead of winter. Of course, some bosses wouldn't care and just want to turn a profit. Some millmen, damn idiots, would want to make a bit of extra cash themselves. Some poor guys just fell behind schedule and the bosses made them keep going into the cold weeks. Unions weren't so good back then. This place, though, wasn't just the cold that was nasty. Small town, just a bit south of the mill. Most unkindly folk I've ever met. You wouldn't have thought it was a mill town, and they wouldn't have wanted you thinking it. That's part of the reason I was the boss up there. Not one man or woman in that town wanted any part of that mill. All our guys were contracted from out of town, mostly down here. Still, my boss set up shop there. For whatever reason, the land was cheap, even given that it was pretty uncultivated. Lots of trees, I mean. Big ones, too. So I worked as the boss up there for 2 good seasons. Good seasons, too. Good pay. It was after that second season that I get a call in the middle of January. It's the owner. He says he got a call from the local authorities. Says there's been lights seen coming from the mill. Now, none of our guys, or anyone, should be up there. We cleared out in late November. The police in the area are saying they won't check, and nobody else from that town is going to go do it either. They told the owner it was his problem, and so now he was making it my problem. So we left that night, and there we are up there later the next day, me and Tony Stewart and little Mikey Thompson. Well, I told you we wouldn't be up here too long. Town's just up ahead there, so I'll phone in how there was nothing out of the ordinary, and we'll head back in the morning.
2 days or 2 weeks, damn wasting my time either way. What were these folks thinking calling us up here like this over nothing?
Oh, it was probably just some drifter, just keeping himself warm for the night. Didn't touch anything important, that's all that matters.
Drifter. Didn't touch anything, sure, but left his pack, left his filthy clothes, and his garbage.
Why do you figure he would have done that?
How am I supposed to know that, Mikey?
Well, it's just that he left a fire pit. Food, too. Half-eaten. Couldn't be a bear that got him, could it?
What do you care for, bear or no bear? Any drifter, anyone around here is face down dead in the woods by now. Damn, it's cold.
Yeah, we hear you, Tony. How you holding up there, Mikey?
Oh, I'm okay.
Say, Mikey, what have you been hauling around that bag for all day?
Oh, this? Nothing special. Just this rifle I got over the holiday.
Jesus, Mikey! Put that thing away before you blow my head off.
Will you calm down? But he's right, Mikey. Best to put that away. What are you bringing that up here for anyway?
Well, I just thought I'd shoot a couple of birds while we were up here. But I never saw any. Didn't mean to startle you, Tony.
It's all right. But God knows where you got that thought. You know what this place is like. Almost no animals for miles around. Yeah, I can understand it, though. I wouldn't want to nest anywhere near this town.
I always wondered, is that normal? I figured the little critters just didn't like the mill, but for 2 years...
Well, you're right there. You don't find too many animals living around a mill, for obvious reasons. But it is a little odd up here. No birds, no squirrels, no anything for miles all year round. It's like they all cleared out on account of something awful.
Didn't you hear me? They cleared out on account of the queer folk in this town.
Now that's enough of that talk. We're here. Hello? Hello? Anyone around? But there was no answer. We looked around for about half an hour and there wasn't a single soul left in the town. Eventually we made our way to the local drugstore and found a note that just said, closed for the season. Closest thing we had to any kind of contact that day. Well, we didn't think on it too long. Not the strangest thing any of us had ever seen, given the people, given the place. We'd also driven straight there in the dead of night. Dead of morning, really. So we were all eager to get some shut-eye for the drive back. Now, when we set up shop there about 2 years before, the company built a couple of employee cabins. Flimsy little things, but good enough to sleep in and cook your dinner and put your feet up at the end of the shift. So we set up in my place, the supervisor's cabin. I tried to phone the owner, but the damn phone was dead. Only had the phone in the one cabin there, and I wasn't about to go breaking and entering into someone's house just to phone in about nothing. So we called it a day. Mikey set up an extra cot in the half level up there. Tony insisted he was going to go stay on his own. There was never much sense arguing with Tony Stewart, so I gave him his key and he was on his way. Me? I stayed up a little bit. Grabbed the bottle of rye on my desk and did a little bit of thinking. Ah, that reminds me. How are we doing over there? Ah, you're getting there. Let's just top you off. I feel like you might need it. I didn't know it that night, but I needed that drink. I thought about my 2 years working near that town. No, it wasn't the town. It was just being in that place. There was something wrong with it. Big trees, plenty of plants, but barely an animal to be seen anywhere. And just the awful feeling you'd get at night, like you shouldn't be there. None of us ever said it, but you could understand why the people there were the way they were. Anyone living there all year round would be like that. But they weren't there now, and I could understand that too. That feeling, that awful feeling, it was worse that night than I'd ever felt it. There was no way I was going to get any sleep, so I had to distract myself somehow. The last thing I remember is sitting in my chair and thinking I was going to die that night. But I didn't die that night. I woke up to an awful crash and the worst sound I'd ever heard. It was a scream. Maybe. There was some kind of human noise, and it was coming from the cabin right next to ours. I rushed out. I still had my boots on from the night before, and I went to go see what happened. Whatever it was, it woke up Mikey too, and he wasn't far behind me. Now, I said those cabins were flimsy, but they were still solid lumber, made by builders and engineers, and something had blown or ripped the back of that cabin almost clean off. I called out to Tony, and he didn't answer, so I started making my way through the wreckage of that cabin. And I found him. Part of him. Like I told you, I worked a lot of jobs up north in my day. Good and bad, safe and unsafe. I've seen folks lose fingers and more. I watched someone die instantly under the weight of a 15-ton pine. I've seen up close what a grizzly can do to a man. What that force of nature can do when it's hungry and has nothing left to lose. But I'd never seen anything like what I did at that moment. And I never have to this day. There, in the middle of the cabin floor, was an awful, glistening red pile of Tony Stewart. It was clear that whatever had ripped open that cabin had ripped him open too, and sent blood, bones, and guts flying across the room. And whatever it was, it had headed back into the forest, leaving a red trail behind it. I finally noticed that Mikey was behind me, and it looked like the scene was too much for him. He was tossing up whatever dinner he'd had the night before, and it was taking everything I had not to do the same. Maybe the one thing that was giving me any comfort was seeing that rifle slung across Mikey's shoulder. But not even that felt much good once we got back to the car. There was a tree right on top of it, and the whole thing was a smoking mess. But it was more than that, you see. The car was beat up all over, bashed apart from every angle, like some huge thing had ripped that tree up from the roots and used it to smash our car like a child breaks a toy. So you can imagine the kind of situation that left us in. More important at that moment than finding out what happened to Tony Stewart was making sure it didn't happen to us. Things didn't look very good, with no car and no chance in hell of making it to civilization before freezing to death, let alone before night and what that might bring. Me and Mikey went about breaking into every place we could, trying every phone. Had to give up on that after a while. It was pretty clear that every phone in that town was dead, and we were wasting time. Well, with no hope of getting away and no way to contact anybody, we figured we'd have to wait. Hopefully whoever called in about the mill in the first place would come by again. That was the plan anyway. So Mikey and me, we holed ourselves up in that drugstore, just about the biggest, strongest building in that town. There was no knowing if that'd be good enough, but it had to be better than hiding in one of those cabins that got torn apart like a fruit crate. It felt like some sort of animal instinct, hiding in that little drugstore like that. That whole day, that feeling I talked about earlier, the feeling I'd had the whole time I'd been working up there, that had gotten even worse the night before, well, it was the worst yet. And I finally knew what it was, you know, what it felt like. It all felt like I was being watched the whole time. Like there was something waiting in the trees, waiting for who knew what. But it wasn't like being stalked by some wild animal. It was worse than that. It felt malicious. It felt almost human. Almost. So there we were. It was getting dark as far as we could tell. We'd done the best job we could boarding up every door and window. There was a small coal furnace and we had that going. No choice, really, if we didn't want to freeze to death. We hadn't said much over the past day. There wasn't much to say. We were just sitting there, waiting and waiting. It wasn't very long after it got dark. It was the snow we heard first. The crunching, I mean. It was thick out there, so we could hear it getting closer from a ways off. Big, even crunches, which I guessed meant big, even steps, which I knew meant something big. It made its way to the front of the store and it stopped, and it stayed there for a moment. And then we could hear it circling around the building. It must have been looking for the best spot to get in from. Mikey just had this look on his face, this sad look of hope, like maybe that thing didn't know we were in there. I wanted to believe that too, but I didn't. It just kept circling around, and then all of a sudden it stopped, at the front. And it started smashing on the front door, the windows, everything. We spent hours barring up that entrance, and it didn't mean anything. Wood and glass were flying everywhere, and now I could see flashes of the thing through the gaps in our barrier. One second it looked like it had thick, dark fur, and another it looked like it had hard skin. It was too fast to really tell. In spite of the damage it was doing, it didn't look like it could get in. The building was too strong, and the entrances were too small. I'll never forget the sound it made. An animal roars, howls, cries. It does so out of some primal instinct. Fear, pain. This was anger. And it wasn't a roar or a howl. It was a scream. A scream anyone would have heard for miles around. And then, after it made that ungodly noise, it walked away. It ran. I would tell you what I thought at that moment, but I didn't think anything. Good thing, too. Didn't have time to be thinking. Barely half a minute after that thing ran off, a tree came flying through the front of that store. It blew right through the wall, sent the concrete flying. I took a piece of debris right to the head myself. You can still see the scar right here, see? Where there's no hair. Didn't think much of it then. There were bigger concerns. Namely, that tree had come down right on Mikey Thompson's legs, calling out for me to do something. But I couldn't move that tree an inch. Maybe if I had a minute to make a lever, but I didn't have a second, because that thing was back. It was dark and the thing was hunched over, so I couldn't tell much, but it was tall. Maybe 20 feet, maybe more. Fur all over, every color, with patches of skin here and there. 2 long legs and 2 arms, with big hands and terrible claws, sharp and dirty. And I didn't want to see it, but I did. There was something around its neck. It was skin. Human skin. There was no denying it. It was wrapped around its neck like some kind of scarf. As for the face, well, it was too dark in there to make out anything yet. Before I could do anything, it swatted me aside like I was nothing and lifted that tree off Mikey with one arm. It grabbed him and bolted off into the woods. I thought about what was wrapped around that thing's neck, and I thought of Tony Stewart, and I wasn't about to let that happen to 2 people on my watch. In the chaos, I'd seen that Mikey had dropped his gun. It didn't look like it had gotten damaged, so I grabbed it and I ran after that thing into the trees. It was easy enough to follow them. Mikey's screams led the way. They had some ground ahead of me, but I was able to catch up. The forest around that town was dense. It looked like the thing couldn't move as fast as it did in the open. I could see it was about 100 feet off, swerving through the trees, and I was able to get a good sprint going. Now, I'm not the best shot, not by far, but you spend most of your time up north and you learn how to handle yourself. When I got close enough, about 50 feet between me and that thing, I took that rifle and I made my shot. It echoed off into the night with not a soul to hear it say for me, Mikey, and that monster. But it stopped, and it turned to me. I could just barely see its eyes in the moonlight, blue and shining, burning with a cold fire and looking right at me. The next second it was coming back, rushing right at me. I took aim and I fired again. If my first shot didn't hit it, that one for sure did. It screamed that awful scream again and threw Mikey to the ground, and I knew I had to run. I don't know what it was at that moment, but all I can think of was getting to the sawmill. I knew it was close. I knew I had no chance just sticking in the trees or running back to town. I remembered where the foliage was thickest on the way there, getting every second I could on that thing while it swerved through the trees or just knocked them down. Now, I want to say I had some clever scheme. Lure it into the mill, use the blade to cut it up. But the truth is it just felt safer than anything else. Nothing but dumb instinct. I made it to the mill all right, with no plan, out of breath, that thing barreling down on me only 10 seconds behind. I had to fight it. There was no other option, so I turned around and tried to get one last shot off. It was already on me, and before I could line up, it took a hold of my arm and squeezed. Squeezed with all that power that could tear open cabins and rip up pines from their roots. My whole arm went numb. But in that split second, I mustered up all my strength and squeezed my hand as hard as I could. I saw the shot go right into the thing's shoulder. Smacked me aside and howled with anger. It started thrashing around in the mill, knocking down walls and support beams. I barely managed to crawl away as that thing brought down the whole building, right on top of itself. That awful strength. It had busted up my arm and Mikey's legs and ripped Tony right open. But now it had done itself in. After everything settled, I crawled up to get a good look at it. It was covered in tons of wood and metal, but it was still poking out of the debris from the chest up. It probably tried to get out when it had seen what was happening, but it was too late. Up close, right up close, what I couldn't see before in the dark was all too clear in the moonlight. The fur wasn't its own. It was bear and wolf and deer and elk and every other animal you could think of in those parts. It was wearing them like a coat, crudely stitched together, and underneath was hard gray skin. I checked where I'd shot it, and the bullets had barely pierced the thing. Where I'd shot it in the shoulder, the bullet was only lodged in an inch or two. All of a sudden it spasmed a bit and coughed. It was still alive. Barely. I went over to its head, where I'd been avoiding this whole time. I unwrapped its scarf of human skin, of Tony Stewart, of that drifter, of whoever else, and I pulled over its big fur hood. And there it was, staring back at me. A giant face, as human as yours or mine. An old wrinkled face, and those terrible burning eyes. And it coughed out something I'll never forget, no matter how long I live or how much I drink. It called out something in a low, awful voice, in a language that no other man has ever heard but me, but something that no one who'd lived the life that I'd lived could mistake. Cold, it said. So cold. Mikey Thompson didn't make it through the night. Too much blood loss. I barely survived myself, just long enough for the owner of the mill to find me. He'd driven up after he hadn't heard from us for 2 days. I told him everything, and he saw it. That thing. And we agreed on what had to be done. We torched it all. The mill, and the cabin with Mikey and what was left of Tony inside. We said we'd found the mill that way, that some crazy must have done it and set fire to the cabin the next night. The police up there didn't give us any trouble. Nobody in that town did. They were very understanding, and more than happy to see us go. So, what do you think? You don't believe me, huh? Don't worry, I can see it in your face. What do I know? Old guy with one good arm, can't work no more, so I stay home all day drinking. Well, what do you know? Storm let up. I guess you'll be going. Drive safe, and watch yourself. It's still cold, and you never know what's out there. The Wrong Station is created and produced by Alexander Saxton and Anthony Botello, featuring Anthony Botello, with music composed by Alon Zitron and original artwork by Jenny Henderson. This week's episode, In the Dead of Winter, was written by Anthony Botello. Tony Stewart was played by Chaitanya Valadares, and Mikey Thompson was played by Eric Sinnott. Tune in every Thursday for new full-length episodes. You can follow The Wrong Station on Facebook, Twitter, and iTunes, and email us at thewrongstation@gmail.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.
True crime fans, Mondays, there's a new crime drama you have to check out. The Irrational.
It was a couple of years ago, she tells me. It's still snowing, but it's warmed up and we're both drunk, so when she says, "All right, I've got another one," we both light another cigarette and huddle closer together under the heat lamp. And she tells it like this. It was one of those El Nino winters where it's warm the entire season. It was the warmest February I can ever remember living through. But March 1st, we get a real bastard of a storm coming in. Temperature drops down to, well, not too bad. Only -6 or something. Not counting the wind, but cold enough. And it starts to snow like a motherfucker. Shovel the front walk every 20 minutes kind of snow. I'm at a friend's place, up near St. Clair. At the time, I was living in a shitty basement down near Bloor and Ossington. And I like the snow. I don't know if I told you that. Usually I hate the winter, but as long as it's snowing, I'm okay. So, it's not that cold, and I've been feeling stir-crazy in my apartment for most of that week, same as anyone does when your ceilings are 5.5 feet high and it's below freezing outside. So that night, I decide I'll walk home, snow or no snow. And so I start to walk. It's really a gorgeous night out. It's cold, but there's barely any wind, so it doesn't feel that bad. And the snow's coming down thick. That part of the city, at least back then, I don't know how it is now, but back then it was a poorer part of town, so all the streetlights were the orange ones, you know? Like how you go to a wealthy part of town, and they have these bright white city lights, but then you get to an ethnic neighborhood or something, and all of a sudden either the city hasn't gotten around to it yet, or the local business council isn't rich enough to change things. So all the streetlights are still this yellow-orange color. So they're like that where I am, and the lights are all casting these cones of illumination down towards the ground, and you can see through these beams of light just how thick and heavy the snow is coming down. The sky's light too. All the snow reflecting the city's light pollution back down onto it, I guess. And the sky looks sort of, that orangey purple. So I'm walking home, and there's nobody in the streets. Nobody. At the bottom of Oakwood, there's a backlog of buses. 4 or 5 of them. Half of them are Dufferin buses that I guess got diverted. All of them are practically empty. Everyone's staying in because of the winter storm. There's barely any cars on the road either. It's just me and the city and all that snow. I don't know the area well at all, by the way. At least back then. I just moved west from around Greenwood and Danforth. And you know how it is with Bloor Street. Nobody ever goes north of there, right? So as far as I'm concerned, this is all new territory. I do not know the streets. I'm just sort of assuming that if I head east enough, I'll hit Ossington, and if I hit south enough, I'll hit Bloor. But it's a nice night, and I like the snow, so I'm taking my time, exploring the empty city. I had a good pair of winter boots. And while I'm walking alone, through these streets that I don't really know, I sort of lose track of time. So I'm not really sure how long I've been walking, though it doesn't feel like all that long, when I come to the park. I'd been thinking about heading east another block when I came to it, but it looked like a nice park, so I figured I'd stay walking south along its edge for another little while. It looked like it was pretty big, so I was sort of surprised I'd never heard of it. But, like I said, I'd just moved west, and even now I'm not going to pretend like I know how things are in that part of town anyway. It seems like my kind of park though, when I look at it. Big old trees, a path leading off at an angle, no playground or wading pool or shit for the kids. Just trees, you know? There's a certain white noise that heavy snow makes when it lands among the boughs of the trees. I'm sure you can hear it in your head right now. You don't need me to tell you what a soothing sound it is. So I'm walking alongside this park, listening to the snow and the trees, looking for the name of the park the entire time, but there isn't a sign posted anywhere. After a little while, I glance across the street, and I notice something strange, which is that I'm passing the last house, and starting to walk past parkland on that side as well. It was unexpected, because they both seem like big parks, like maybe they're both part of the same huge park, and I can't think of any park that big in that part of the city, except for maybe High Park, and even I knew at the time that I was way too far east to be in High Park. But, like I said, I like the snow, and I like parks, and I like to explore the city, and I like the sound of snow in the trees, and I know I'll hit Bloor eventually, so I just keep walking. After a couple of minutes, I realize how silent it is. No cars have driven past since I entered the park, and there's no sound of traffic coming through the trees at all. I can't remember ever seeing any parks of this size on maps of the city, and I don't remember anyone ever talking about brown bagging beers in a park north of Bloor either. I think maybe people don't bike through here in the summer because it's full of crackheads or something. It's a thought that makes me start to feel nervous. And, after a little while further, I really start to get freaked out, because I realize how long it's been since I passed an intersection, any intersection, and just how large this park I'm obviously walking through the middle of must be. And I'm starting to get cold. That's when I notice the house. The first one I've seen in about 15 minutes. At first I don't think it's a real house. It looks sort of like a place for historical reenactors. Shabby, built of logs, that sort of thing. In the gloom I can't make out the blue heritage plaque, but I assume it's there somewhere. And weirdly, for that time of the night, and for the weather, there's someone sitting on the porch. As I start to get closer, I see that it's a woman in a dress. And again, it looks like an old-fashioned kind of dress. There's something wrong with her face, though. In the orange streetlights, it runs dark. But I see closer up that her nose is bleeding freely, and that a thick, inky stream is running from her nostrils, over her mouth, and down to the collarbone. And I think maybe she's not getting the help she needs because of the storm. So I call to her, is she all right? And the sound of my voice seems to startle her, like, really startle her. Like it's crazy that someone would be walking past in the middle of the city. And after she pulls herself together, she waves me off and says, no, she's okay. But with head injuries, I feel like you have to be sure. So I come up to the bottom of the stairs leading up to the porch where she's sitting, and I ask her what happened. And she looks away to the side, and she says she fell. And that's when I realize what's going on. This isn't a historical reenactment thing or something. This is someone's house. Maybe they're very conservative or religious. Or if it is a reenactment kind of place, it's one with a fucked up working situation because this woman is obviously a victim of abuse and has obviously just been struck in the face by her abuser. And so, you know, my mom's a social worker, so I go up onto the porch and I crouch down beside her and I say, hey, you can tell me the truth. And she just stiffens right up in her dress and overcoat, and she tells me she doesn't know what I'm talking about. Well, if somebody doesn't want help, then there's nothing you can do about that. So I stand up and I tell her that nobody has the right to hurt her, and that there are organizations that are set up just to help people like her, and that I know how to put her in touch with these organizations. And I give her my card. And as I'm giving her my card, I hear a noise from inside the house. And the woman goes pale, paler than she already is from the cold, and she tells me that I should leave. And I look around and see how far I am from, well, civilization. And so I do what she says. I back down the steps and I keep heading off into the cold. I make it halfway back down the street when she catches up to me. I want to go, she tells me. I want to leave him behind. And I say, now? And she says, right now. So I say, all right, let's go. She puts her arm through mine and we start to move. I ask her how far we are from Bloor Street, but she tells me that she doesn't know the roads that well. And a little while later, we hear someone shouting behind us, and she grabs my arm tighter and we hurry faster. The snow's still falling, but not fast enough to hide our footprints, not from someone right on our tail. So I keep urging her to run, but the snow's thick and we're both pretty short, and so the going's slow. After a few moments, I think I can hear someone crashing through the woods behind us, and a chill crawls up my spine because a moment later, even through the muffling snow, I start to hear shouting, deranged shouting. Shouting that just keeps creeping up and up the octaves into a pitch that no healthy person ever feels the need to use. And the woman looks at me, and her eyes are wide, like I don't know, like a dog's eyes when you take it to the vet. And she says to me, "It's my husband." Have you ever been truly scared? I mean, the kind of scared where you know you're in danger for your life, and you want to be brave, but what your heart and your brain and your body are doing to respond to the situation are just totally beyond your control. It's like there's this little capsule in your head, and that's you, or at least the part of you that thinks of itself as you. And this little voice, floating in this little capsule in your head, is watching and making notes and judgments, and trying to control things, but it doesn't have any grip over anything. It's just this little impotent source of chatter that never ceases to share its irrelevant remarks, but you can barely hear it over the sound of blood thrashing in your ears. Well, that's what it was like when he came out of the trees. I heard, or really I felt, him step into the clearing behind us, and reality turned to smoke in my fingers. When you're faced with something like that, you lose the ability to focus, you lose track of details. It's like the whole world is put through a blurred filter, and you're screwing up your eyes just to try and see straight, but you can't, no matter how hard you try. You're trying to slow your breathing and your heart rate, but they won't be slowed. He comes out of the woods behind us, screaming her name. He's in his shirt sleeves in the snow, and he's a big man, and his face is red, and I can't tell if it's from the cold or if he's drunk. He starts to stride towards us, and he's shouting and swearing at her, and I look at her and she's just gone catatonic. And this whole time, that little voice in that little capsule starts making its little observations. It's telling me things like, oh, he's probably about 6'1", maybe 220 pounds. At the rate he's moving, he'll probably be here in about 8 seconds. That snow he's walking through looks really soft. I wonder what it feels like to have my neck broken. Nonsense like that. It's as though consciousness in a situation like that is just this silly appendage that isn't really worth anything. So the body cuts it off from control because it puts stupid emphasis on useless things. But the program's still running in the background, and after the fact, all you can remember are these silly little notions that you had. And you want to remember more, but all the important memories are too traumatic. So your brain takes them apart and stores the different pieces of them into different cupboards in your head. And one of the things that this weedy voice says is that this is the part where you stand up to him and he goes away. So I step between him and the woman, and I try to think of something to say, but my brain feels overloaded, sluggish, and all I can think of is, leave us alone. And even that doesn't come out right. I try and steady myself, square my chest and shout it, but all I can manage is this small and shaky voice. And that little mind in the little capsule bobbing in my head is filled with contempt for me. The man doesn't even seem to hear me. He doesn't even look at me. He just keeps coming through the snow towards us with his hands that look like they've just been cutting raw meat. And he's shouting, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to break your neck and leave you out here to get buried in the snow. And I run. I shout at her to run too, and she does, but she's wearing this long dress, so she's not able to keep up. And he's fast. I hear a shriek behind me, and I half turn to see that he's tackled her. He rolls her over and forces her face down into the snow, and I can hear her sobbing and trying to get her face up so that she can breathe. And he's shouting in her ear while he holds her head down in the snow, calling her a bitch and a whore and telling her he'll kill her. He'll kill her parents and her sisters too if she tries to leave him again. And I take a step back towards them, and I try and shout something, but no sound comes out of my mouth. But he looks up at me with those bloodshot eyes and irises that look black in the yellow-orange light. And he gets to his feet, and he starts to come after me. And like I said, he's fast. I run like I've never run before. I don't look back. I can hear him just behind me. I can hear his breath rasping in the cold, and I just run. By now the snow's almost knee-high, and it's hard going. My lungs feel like they're full of battery acid, and I trip and fall down this steep hill and get totally disoriented. At the bottom of the hill, I struggle to get up to my feet. I've lost one of my gloves, and my hand is red and burning from the cold. I catch a glimpse of him sliding down the hill after me, and I set off running again. I'm on open ground, and I realize that I'm out of the park. I'm running across an intersection, and there's a convenience store right in front of me, still open, even though it's a storm and it's past 11 at night. I collapse against the wall and look back behind me, trying to catch my breath. He's standing across the street from me, still in his shirt sleeves, with his red hands and forearms, and his dark red-rimmed eyes. His breath comes out in thick cones of fog, and his shoulders are pumping up and down with exertion. We look at each other for a long moment, and those dark eyes feel like they're going to swallow me up. I'm trying to find any hint of just anything, any consciousness, compassion, anything that I could latch onto as a signifier of our common humanity. But there's nothing. Maybe, deep in his head somewhere, there's a capsule with a small voice too, bobbing along on a black sea of rage. He reaches into his pocket, and he pulls out a balled-up wad of cloth and tosses it overhand. It sails through the air between us, unraveling so a strip flutters behind it like the tail of a comet. It arcs over the power lines. First it's white in the street lights, then dark against the light-polluted sky, then light again in the lantern glow. It lands just in front of me, throwing up a little cloud of powdery snow, which drifts away and resettles. I reach down for the cloth. It's only been on the ground for a second, and a layer of snow has already begun to settle on it. I pick it up. It looks white and black under the yellow sign of the convenience store, but I can see its subtle stripe of cornflower blue, and I can feel from the sticky weight on one end what would be red in better light. It's a strip of his wife's dress, tacky with her blood. I look up again, and he's walking back up the hill. The last thing I see of him is his white shirt disappearing into the shadows under the trees of the park. She flicks her cigarette butt away to fizz out in the snow. That's the end of her story, apparently. So what happened next, I ask her. She says she finds her way home, pours herself a glass of straight vodka, and picks up the phone to call the police. But then she realizes she doesn't know where to send them. She pulls up maps of the area, but she can't find that park. And she calls people who live in the area, but they don't know of any big parks either. And the next day, when the sun's shining on the fresh fallen snow, she retraces her steps to find the convenience store. But across the street from it, there's only a little parkette, with a playing ground and a wading pool. Kid shit. Couldn't have been more than 50 feet across. So that's it, I say to her. It was all just a dream or something. Yeah, probably, she says. Then she presses something into my hands, and shakes the snow from her hair and opens the door. A burst of warm air and music wafts out of the bar as she disappears back inside. I look down at what she's handed me. It's a piece of cloth, and in the yellow glare of the street lights, it looks like it's black and white. The Wrong Station is created and produced by Alexander Saxton and Anthony Botello, featuring Anthony Botello, with music composed by Alon Zitrin and original artwork by Jenny Henderson. This week's episode, A Walk in the Park, was written by Alexander Saxton. Tune in every Thursday for full-length episodes. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and iTunes, and leave a review on iTunes. You can email us at thewrongstation@gmail.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.
True crime fans, Mondays, there's a new crime drama you have to check out.
Well, things have been pretty good since the war ended. People are working again, for one thing. They even have this government program that'll find a job for you. For all those people who never could before. And the people who just didn't want to work. Everything is cheaper, too. Food, water, energy. Especially energy. That's probably what makes everything else so damn cheap. They've got these units. You saw one. The big metal box out back. Big tubes going in the house. Anyway, they've got these units that they send to every new home. Special government workers come and install it for you. It's really a fantastic machine. Runs like a dream. Doesn't matter what season, what weather, that thing will power your whole home. Yep, things have really changed. I guess it helps when your side wins. Still, maybe you made the right call leaving the country when you did. It was a long few years. It was a long 7 years. I thought you were dead wrong back then when you left. It'll be over by the end of the year, I told myself. And why not? That's what everyone else was saying too. Nobody knew how bad it was going to get before the end. How are you sleeping these days? Yeah? Same as normal then, huh? I'm sleeping alright myself, nowadays. Though there was a long time when I wasn't. Actually, it was right after I moved into this house. Have you ever fixated, and I mean really fixated, on a sound while you're lying in bed? Sure you have, you can't help it. There are those nights when you're lying there with your eyes wide open, and no matter what you do and what you try, you just can't fall asleep. Maybe it's nervous energy. Maybe it's something that happened that day or something that's going to happen tomorrow. You're just lying there, and you hear something. A dripping tap, your watch lying on the bedside table, just the tiniest little thing that in the middle of the afternoon you'd never even hear, let alone pay attention to. But when you hear it at night, while you're just lying there, it consumes your thoughts. It becomes the whole world, that drip, 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 tick, tick, tick. Well, for me it was a hum. Started as a hum anyway. It was my first week in the house and my first week at my new job. Government job, office work, not very physical. Now, my job during the war, I'd be walking around all day. I'd be quite physical, you know? I've gotten a little slower now. A bit more fat too, if I'm honest. But, at the time, sitting at a desk all day made me a bit restless. So I'm lying in bed, already wired, and I hear this low hum. Real low. Hold your breath for a second, huh? That there. Maybe you heard it? Probably not, though. It takes that razor-sharp focus that only the combination of restlessness and exhaustion gives you. So I hear it, and I try to ignore it. I try to ignore it for a whole hour, till I can't ignore it anymore, and I ask myself, what is that damn hum? I had to get up, check to make sure every light in the house was off, every fan, made sure the fridge and freezer were closed, the stove was off, windows closed, and they all were. But that hum still kept humming. So I did my best to try and ignore it again, which wasn't a very good try, and eventually I just passed out from the exhaustion. And that went on for a few days. Do you mind if I smoke? Oh, that's right, you don't even know that I smoke now. Me, Mr. High School Track and Field, never thought I'd touch the stuff. Well, that's recent too. Recent-ish anyway. 7 years of war and I still never touched a cigarette. All it took was a desk job to make me crack. That and the hum. Sleep deprivation is a hell of a thing. Anyway, I won't smoke. That'd probably be too jarring for you. I'll just have a drink instead. I never told you what I do now that I think about it. I work for the government, like I said. Veteran affairs. We had a lot of people fighting. Conscription helped with that. Lots of people fighting. Lots of weapons that they were using. I'm sure you read about it in the papers where you were. Chemicals, gases, special ammunitions. They even started experimenting with laser weaponization near the end. Well, yeah, we were doing it too, of course. And those bastards deserved every dose they got back. So anyway, we've got thousands, tens of thousands coming back with every type of damage a person can sustain. People who have had their eyes burned out with gas, arms completely vaporized up to the shoulder, brain damage from a noise grenade. It's my job to help determine who can still work and who can't. So we set up people who can still work with the job, and of those left we determine who can still contribute to society in any way. I try my best to be fair and kind. I fought for our government too, everyone in that department did, but it can't always be helped. The government is fair, but it has to be practical. Everyone works, everyone contributes. If you can't, well, you understand. Anyway, back to that humming. It had been a few weeks, and it starts driving me completely nuts. And it's getting louder. I'm trying as hard as I can to work out all my energy during the day. 2 jogs, push-ups first thing in the morning, and right before bed. It doesn't help. I'm trying warm milk, soothing tea, and every sort of home sleeping remedy I can think of. Nothing. I'm up almost all night, every night. And that humming keeps getting louder. But now it's not humming anymore. The noise starts to take a distinct shape. A sound that's almost real, with a wave, peaks and lows. Like a real sound that's rattling down a long pipe for a long way. It's something, but the way you're hearing it, it's not quite something. Does that make sense? I must have read every book in this house at least 3 times. I can tell you a hell of a lot about Rome now, and a thing or two about how to crochet. At that point, it was as much about trying to distract myself from the sound as it was just trying to sleep. There was this one night, I went down to the kitchen and blew through every cookbook I had. Went through damn near 300 credits worth of ingredients. And I couldn't even eat one bite. The more time went on, the more I kept hearing it at night, the more something felt wrong. Enough to kill my appetite. And not just then, for days on end. I couldn't take it anymore, so I started taking pills. And things were fine. For a while, anyway. I never felt like it was as good as the real thing, though. Not real thing, that's the wrong way to say it. Unassisted sleep, we'll call it. Didn't last long, though. I figure that even if a person were sleeping with the help of pills, a few good whacks with a metal pipe could wake them up. And that's what it felt like, in a sense, the night the pills stopped working. All that time I'd been able to sleep again. That noise was just getting louder and louder, and eventually it was loud enough that even the pills wouldn't help anymore. Like a frog sitting in a pot of water on the stove that doesn't realize the water's boiling until it's too late. And when I woke up that night, I heard a scream. I swore to myself that I could make out a scream. There was nothing else it could be. Reverberating through the ducts, through every wall and every room. And there was something else. I could trace it now, follow it. Before, when it was a hum, it was just everywhere. It was even throughout the house. Now it was louder in certain rooms, certain areas of the house. I followed it to where it was loudest, and it took me to the back of the house. The backyard, in fact. To the power unit. But there was no sound coming from the box itself. It was just silently running under thick metal panels. But the tubes, it was unmistakable. It made sense. Those tubes ran to every part of the house to provide power. Well, I was overjoyed. After weeks and weeks, I thought I'd finally found the cause of that noise and I could stop it. So I called the energy department the next morning, and there were workers there by mid-afternoon. Of course, when they got there, they told me there's nothing wrong with this unit. Do not tamper with this unit, they said. It was all too much. I drank that day. Too much, really. I sat where we're sitting now, drinking and waiting for the night to come, and the screaming to start again. I wondered what I'd done to deserve this, and if there was really a sound at all, was my mind playing tricks on me? I'd never felt guilty about my service during the war. I was damn proud to have served the government. I was never drafted for combat abroad. Call that lucky or not. I was a member of our domestic force. We were the last line of defense if any of the enemy should infiltrate the state. Really, though, our primary task was to deal with internal threats. Many were not content when we declared war, as I'm sure you know. I can't see why, personally. The enemy had been agitating our borders for years, blocking trade, threatening our way of life, and worst of all, openly insulting our government. They had to be put down, and they had no one to blame but themselves. But still, some of our people protested. Small ones at first, then larger. We entertained it at the start, but after some idiot brought a bomb to a speaking event, we put a stop to that. Later in the war, we shifted gears again, when the looting started. There was open rebellion in the southern capital, and they'd cordoned off the city. The government's plan was to let them starve and reclaim the territory once the main forces had returned. But plans change, and a small splinter force was sent ahead to retake an essential munitions factory near the city outskirts. That was my unit. It was easy, as far as those things go. We'd cleared most of the facility 10 minutes after landing, and we split up to sweep the last few rooms. It was the mess hall. They must have been trying to grab as much food as they could before getting out. An older woman and a teenage boy, as emaciated as I've ever seen two people. The boy had a knife, and didn't seem to think twice about running at me. And I didn't think twice about putting a bullet in his heart. After that, I took that woman, his mother I assume, into custody. She screamed and cried. And I didn't lose a wink of sleep that night. You know that? Or the next night. Or the next. Until I'd moved into this goddamn house. Was that the screaming I was hearing now, I thought? I was good and truly drunk when night rolled around. And goddamn if that sound wasn't the loudest it had ever been. Just pounding through every wall of every room. Didn't even matter if I knew where it was coming from. It was unbearable no matter where in the house you went. So maybe it was that. Maybe it was the booze. Maybe it was my beliefs from the last 7 years being shaken. But I had to do something. I took a crowbar, and I went out back to that unit, and I yanked it open. And there was a man inside. I said earlier that mother and her son were more emaciated than any humans I'd ever seen. And that wasn't quite true. This man, this thing, I could see its ribs, the shape of its bones jutting out of its hands and arms, hair thin and bleached white, falling out in clumps. He was old, or just damaged, I couldn't tell. He was on a set of pedals with needles and thin tubes sticking out of every part of his body. His skin was pale, probably from lack of light. But the tone, it was unmistakable. This was one of the citizens of our enemy. There are plenty of rumors about what our government decided to do with the enemy's citizens. But now I know the truth. We use them for energy. They pedal all day and we suck out every bit of bioelectricity we can, giving them just enough water and nutrient to keep them going. Then that kinetic and biological energy is converted so it powers your whole house. I don't understand the actual science all too well, but it's brilliant stuff, really. I called those government energy guys back the next day, explained the whole situation, and they replaced my battery with a quieter one. I'm not supposed to know about all this, but because of my good service, I was forgiven for uncovering that secret. Do you see this brand right here on my forearm? Well, I better hope I don't get another one of those in my lifetime. What a relief, right? It wasn't my conscience at all. Just some damn enemy scum who couldn't keep his mouth shut and pedal. Oh, that'll be reclamation. What's with that surprised look? You're a deserter. Do you think I was just going to invite you into my home? Don't worry. They won't kill you. They need you. We need every power source we can get our hands on. Come on in, boys! The Wrong Station is created and produced by Alexander Saxton and Anthony Botello. Featuring Anthony Botello. With music composed by Alon Zitrin and original artwork by Jenny Henderson. This week's episode, The Hum, was written by Anthony Botello. Tune in every Thursday for full-length episodes. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and leave a review on iTunes. You can email us at thewrongstation@gmail.com to ask whatever it is you ask a podcast about. Until next time, thank you for listening. This episode of The Wrong Station is brought to you in partnership with Unwell, a Midwestern Gothic mystery. Set in a fictional Ohio town, Unwell is an episodic series that explores the fallibility of memory, building community and family, and being queer in the rural Midwest, all as a slow burn mystery with moments of truly spine-chilling supernatural horror. Unwell is currently in its 5th and final season, so what better time to binge the whole thing? You know we love excess over here. You can find out more at unwellpodcast.com. And thank you for supporting both shows. You are my sunshine.
Incredible as they seem, are not the results of mass hysteria.
My only... You may wish to adjust the dial. You are currently tuned into The Wrong Station.
A house at the top of the hill. The lights are always on, warm at night, but nobody is ever seen within. The people in the town are content enough to be left alone, so they're content enough to leave alone. When he's just a boy, he meets a girl down by the creek. She says that she lives up there, and that he should come to visit for dinner. And so he goes. And when he goes, the door is opened, and his coat is taken by someone he identifies as a butler, but at the very moment after cannot remember anything about. Not age, not gender, not color of hair. And he's alone in the well-lit foyer. He begins to walk through the house, and the first room he enters is a dining room with covered platters on the table. He smells dinner, but is too polite to look inside, hungry though he is. He takes a handful of nuts from the sideboard instead, salted almonds, and eats them as he walks the house. He has not gone up any stairs, but the next room he finds himself in is a glassed-in terrace that overlooks the forest and the far below town. Between the time of a look to the left and back, the girl is there. He realizes that he does not know her name. He asks her and she laughs, and starts to tell him about a river she knows that winds around the dozen faces of a mountain and into conifer forests filled with fog, and how when a fire starts among the damp needles, the smoke and the fog rise together, twin helix, towards the cloud-bound peaks. And without a break between, she tells him about a place she knows where dry straw broken grass pricks up from red-veined and black soil for 100 miles to the mountains, and how small horses live on the plain, and when the winter comes they stand together against the white wind and the white sky, manes and tails flowing together, brown into black, with a 100-mile-away mountain standing, whiter against white behind him. And after she tells him this story, she kisses him for a long, perfect moment and leads him back to the dining room. When she opens the tureens, one is filled with cedar needles, the other full of black earth, veined with red, with yellow bits of broken straw grass shooting up and through. Gingerly he takes a small fingerful of the soil, and when he holds it up to the light is moonlight, and he's standing alone at the crest of the hill, cold in the clammy air of a rainy spring night. In after years, he becomes a bitter and suspicious old man, and when he sees children at the creek, he shouts at them and drives them away with his cane.
With a series of oiled clicks, he loads the shotgun and locks the barrels back in place. The cold air in his nostrils smells of wood smoke. Just ahead of him, just out of sight, a twig snaps. He rises to a half crouch, and his pupils dilate. He makes his breathing as shallow as he can. He thinks for a moment that he can see the antlers over the bulrushes, but there's a haze of fog that touches everything with silver, and he can't be sure if it's real or wishful imagination. He runs his tongue along the front of his teeth, and they're acidic with the oily chain coffee he drank an hour earlier. He suddenly wishes he could brush his teeth and take a bath. Under the slate blue sky, standing in the whisper of red-branched birches, he wishes he could be pure. Another twig crackles, and he holds his breath altogether. For a moment, everything is still. Even the wind drops away. He can hear the space around him like snowfall. A deer emerges from the trees. The deer's eyes are black as the glacial tarns you find scattered in these hills. Its coat is a caramel velvet, with here and there a white spot like a fleck of foam. It moves with utmost grace, and the antlers on its head are a laurel wreath. He puts the gun to his shoulder and fires. Sound cracks open the gray afternoon. The lead shot puts an abrupt ruin to the right side scapula and humerus of the deer. The crimson torrents guide the deer down to a crash in the undergrowth. Spears of dry grass snap beneath its weight. The hunter rises to his feet. Though the sky is so low, he almost feels he has to hunch. Mud and mire suck at his boots as he struggles for dry footing. Tall rushes and red-boned brambles block his way, but he drags them over and stops them at the base, forgetting between him and his prize. It's not too far to go. The shot was taken from only a few meters away. He stops, and for a moment, he stares with a slack mouth at the torn-up body below him. The gun slithers from his fingers and clacks to the ground. It's the same eyes, the same injuries, but it isn't a deer that looks up at him, trying to breathe through a mouth thick with blood. It's a boy. Slowly, the hunter lowers himself down on one knee. The boy looks up at him, and a flicker of recognition shines through the eyes, opaque with pain. He says, "Father?"
She's playing in the woods with her big brother, because it's the middle of September, and the thick humidity of the later summer has slipped itself out of the pines and the sycamores and disappeared to the south. The cabin is miles behind them with their parents, glad for the escape from the city and glad for their children's escape from them, spending a first afternoon together in too long a time. Her brother has a stick in his hand. He always has a stick in his hand when he's out exploring in the woods, and he's standing at the clump of an uprooted tree, directing imaginary armies. He shouts an order at her, and she sticks her tongue out at him. He brandishes his stick, but neither of them takes seriously the idea that he'll hit her with it. He's her big brother, and they both know that he's there to protect her, always. They hear a rustling in the woods, and they look at one another, and he raises a finger to his lips. Shh. Then he points in the direction of the noise, and she nods, and they move towards the noise together, trying to take soft, scoutly footsteps, but instead managing to rustle more dry leaves and crack more dry twigs than if they'd walked normally. They reach the top of a steep slope, and looking down through the dusty trees, they catch a glimpse of a black-brown shape lumbering out of sight. "It's a bear," he hisses at her, and her eyes widen as she puts her arms around herself. "We should go back," she says. He shakes his head. "It's only a black bear," he says, "and it doesn't have any cubs. We can get a better look without being in any danger." She says she's scared, but he says it's okay, and begins to creep down the slope. Because he's her brother, she goes with him. They can still hear the crackling up ahead, but they don't catch another glimpse. Down the slope they go, until they have to clamber a 6-foot drop of Precambrian stone into the dry bed of a little creek. The bear is waiting for them, only it isn't quite a bear. It takes them a moment to notice that it's there, because the sun is westering, and the bear is sitting in the shadow cast by the bole of a dry old tree. But then it inclines its head forward to catch the light, and she covers her mouth and screams as she presses herself against the rock. Her brother steps in front of her and holds up the stick like a spear, but his hand is shaking. And then the bear starts to make a little noise, and after a second, she realizes that it's talking, and what it's saying is, "No, no, 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 no." And out of the shadow of the bole of that tree appears the slim-fingered and elegant arm of a young lady, and it rises to the bear's lips. Shh. And for some reason that she can't later understand, they both do fall quiet. The bear stands up and steps out of the shadow, and it's much taller than it should be. Where its rear legs should be the short, stumpy ones of a bear, they are instead long and powerful limbs shaped like a human's, although with black-brown pelt. From the powerful shoulders and biceps of the bear sprout the pink elbows and pale forearms, wrists, and fingers of a woman. The fingers are moving slowly, the pads of each one brushing sensuously against the pads of their sister thumbs. Still hushing them, still cooing, the bear walks towards them and crouches down by her brother. "No, no, no," says the bear, and with one beautiful hand it plucks the stick from her brother's clammy grip and sets it down among the dead leaves. With its other arm, it begins to caress her brother's head and neck, and to ruffle his hair. "No, no, no, shh, says the bear, and it wraps those beautiful arms around her brother and stands again, lifting him up to its shoulder 12 feet in the air with the strength of the black and awful pillars of its legs. "Shh, says the bear, still caressing her brother's soft hair and shocked, slack face, and with long, slow strides it takes him away and disappears amongst the tan, dry trees. She sits for a long minute by the base of the rocks, trying to shake away her stupor, and when her head finally clears, she begins to scream and scream and scream, and she tries to find her way home, but she gets lost without her brother, and it's not until midnight that the search party finds her, cold and sobbing, alone in the woods. She never sees her brother again. All that they ever find of him later is that stick, laid gentle on the autumn leafy ground.
In the house where he grew up, there had been a deck of cards in an old drawer, and he had never known what game they were meant for. The drawer had been in a little cabinet in his parents' living room, femur high to his adult self, and made of dark and shiny wood. It was set into a little recess in the wall, and was used to support an antique bronze lamp that was shaped like Mercury, stepping up into the air from the stake set in the mouth of a gorgon. To look at it, it had no door, but this was because it was spun around to face the wall. His father and aunt had a dispute over inheritance, and inside the drawers of this cabinet was a bag of old family silver that his aunt did not know existed. And so far as his parents cared, that was all that was there. But as a child, he had had a child's inquisitiveness, and in the other drawers, lined with green baize and smelling like an old billiard table, he found other things to interest children. A handful of tarnished skeleton keys, a brass clock key, old coins from countries that didn't exist anymore, and the deck of cards, printed on thick, yellowing stock, in green-black ink like an American bill. In later years, when he thought back on the deck, he presumed that they were meant for some kind of archaic game like tarot, but could never find out what kind of game that was. Never on the internet, or in several books on old card games leafed through in idle moments of curiosity, could he ever find any image or description of any set of playing cards that ever bore resemblance to the ones in the old drawer, in the old cabinet that faced around backwards in the living room. In truth, he had been so young when he discovered the cards that he couldn't even remember enough details about them to begin to search. He couldn't remember the number of cards in the deck, or the numbers on the cards, or the suits, or even if there were suits. He could only remember one card in the deck, the one that had been on top when he'd first, with young fingers, slit them from their crumbling box that was so much older than he was. Its image, engraved green-black and stamped onto the card, had depicted a skeleton in robes and a pointed Canterbury cap, green grinning out from the top of the deck. At the bottom of the card, in wide capital letters, was the word Patricio. In later years, he tried to remember the other cards, but he couldn't. All that he could remember was Patricio, which he came to decide meant the patrician. Well, a deck of cards isn't something that comes to define a person's whole life, and so, except for now and again, he forgot about the deck of cards and the secret drawer. And decades later, after his parents had died and his aunt had stepped in and sold their home and disposed of their estate, he remembered the secret drawer and assumed that his aunt had gotten her hands on it. Once he thought to call her and ask her about the deck of cards, but she had no idea what he was talking about. He let it go. Little things slip through the cracks of life, and there's nothing to be done for them but accept their loss. And more decades passed, and he had his own children, and he got old, and by they placed him in a home and forgot about him. And he was left to spend the smoke days of his ending life with the other blind and coughing people who had outlived their usefulness, playing cards. And I'm telling you this because I'm the one that he played cards with. And over the course of long and empty years in that home, he and I, we told each other a lot about our lives, and about the little mysteries in them. And it was on one of these days, one of these hundreds and hundreds of days playing cards and waiting to die, that I dealt out the deck. And I noticed one of the cards felt funny in my hand, thick and glossy like vellum. And when he held up his hand to look for queens and aces, he let out a long, slow laugh, and he looked at me over the cards and he said, "I think I'm going to have trouble slawing this one off." And then he set his cards down on the table, and just like that, with his blue eyes open and his white teeth grinning, he died. And before I called for help, I reached across the table and I looked in his hand. It was a bad hand, nothing higher than a 7, except for one face card that I'd never seen before. It was printed green and black on yellowed stock, and it showed a skeleton in a Canterbury cap. Patricio, it said. The patrician. I still have it in my drawer. I wonder, where's the rest of the deck?
eBay Motors is here for the ride. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly.
Listen carefully.
Keep your ride or die alive.
And the countryside all around him, far from looking like the postcards and the storybooks and history books from his childhood, had turned into a yellow-brown dust bowl. He was thirsty when he finally dragged himself into the villa. More than thirsty, in fact. He was dying of thirst. He had used his last